Hello, guys. I am coming to you guys a bit early today. I apologize for, I said that this class was going to start at 9 a.m. EST, and right now it's 9:10 EST. I was having a little bit of trouble getting everything all set up. But today we are going to be covering the planets, and we'll do a little bit of celebrity chart practice with planetary placements and everything like that. And so just a reminder, today will be the last like public class that I'll be teaching. If you guys would like to learn from me in particular, and go through the whole astrology program that I teach all together, you will need to sign up for a private apprenticeship, and Alex can help you out with getting on the list for that. So we are going to jump right into it. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're talking about the planets today. And so we are, of course, are going to start with the sun. So today we're or on this actual worksheet. I'm pulling it up from my email because for some reason I can't get my Word on Windows to actually like pull up. So like all the Mercury retrograde things are happening, and I can't wait until it's over. And so we are going to be starting out talking about the sun, the moon, and Mercury. So we're going to start with that first, and then we'll go from there. So when we talk about the sun and the moon, we're talking about luminaries. And so that's a really important thing that we need to know is that a lot of times some astrologers will say that, the sun and moon aren't planets, which is technically true. They're not. They're luminaries. They give light. And they also bring life of sorts, and they come to represent those things as well. They're light bringers and life givers. And so, with the sun and moon in particular, they represent the divine masculine and the divine feminine. The divine masculine is represented by the sun. The divine feminine is represented by the moon. And we can see this also kind of like trickled down by the fact that the sun only rules one sign and the moon only rules one sign. And with all other planets, all the other planets rule two signs. And so we see a lot of the sun's indications and the moon's indications or correspondences reflected in their respective other planets. Like you see a lot of the moon significations in Venus. You see a lot of the sun significations like between like in Jupiter. And so we just want to have that kind of like as a thing in the back of our mind. But let's talk about the sun first. So the sun, we're going to talk about primary motion because primary motion is actually how we look at a birth chart. It is looking at the birth chart from a perspective of like how the sun moves in a day. So primary motion is going to be clockwise, where secondary motion that's represented by the moon is going to be counterclockwise. So I think like a nice easy way to kind of understand primary and secondary motion, because they are very important in astrology as you build on astrology. Primary motion and secondary motion are built into astrology intrinsically because in tropical astrology, of course, all of our interpretations are really coming from the seasons and what's happening, like, literally in the sky. Modern astrology doesn't really mention primary or secondary motion. However, it's still built in, and you're using these two principles, whether you know it or not. And so, and I think it's especially when you get into like more spiritual astrology, primary and secondary motion become bigger principles that you use more often, because we come to look at primary and secondary motion not, I guess more egotistically, like, what does it have to do with us, but more so, how do we relate to the gods, and how do the gods relate to us and things like that, or how do they see us and how do we see the gods? So if you wanted to ever look at astrology from a more karmic and more zoomed out point of view rather than a psychological point of view, primary and secondary motion will eventually become extremely important for you to understand. And so primary motion is going to be, of course, clockwise, like we were saying. So if you had someone's chart, we talked a little bit about how the ascendant is going to be the first house. So we would look at primary motion clockwise. So that means that the sun would, it would rise over your ascendant. That's why the ascendant is called the rising sign. And then it would, if we were looking at your chart like it was a day, the sun would rise from the ascendant and then go into the 12th house, and then go into the 11th, and then the 10th, and then the ninth, and then the 8th, and then the 7th. And then around the 7th is where we see things set. And so the thing with the sun and how it's attributed to primary motion is primary motion is about constancy. It's about the zoomed out perspective that the gods have of, the universe, how everything kind of like feeds into itself. Everything is constant, it all repeats itself. There are things like the soul that are, eternal. They are constant. And I think like that's the best way to kind of remember primary motion is to think about it as like the soul. The body might die, but the soul lives on. And so we can see this, represented by primary motion, and therefore we also see this as being what the sun represents as well, because the sun represents constancy. Because the sun is also going to represent purpose and what are we kind of aiming for in this life. A lot of times I will get asked, what's the difference between the sun sign and the rising sign? And the difference is that a lot of times you might be like a Cancer or a Scorpio or a Gemini. But if, let's say, you have like a Cancer rising and you're a Libra, you're going to probably fall more in line with the traits of Cancer, even though you have very Libra like ideals. Remember, the ascendant is how you present. It's going to be the ascendant is the first house for a reason. It's everything that has to do with you. So everything that is you is caught up in that first house. And because the ascendant represents the first house, especially in Hellenistic astrology, you are your ascendant. And so we can see like someone like going back to that example of having a Cancer ascendant with Libra, with a Libra sun. Um, Libra is going to represent maybe more the purpose. And so maybe someone with a Cancer ascendant, maybe they really strive towards stability or having some sort of home or having or finding some sort of security. They might be somebody that makes very they are going to make maybe decisions that are more emotion based, however, and they'll be very sensitive. However, they are very used to change, which would still fall in line with Libra. And so I think this is how a lot of people get caught up, because a lot of times we don't realize, I think, in modern astrology about how, or it's not outlined about how the signs build on each other. And so Cancer is a building block for Libra. And so we see some similarities with Cancer and Libra, just for this example, of course, but you could use it with any example. The similarities that they have is that there might be some sensitivity there with the Cancer rising. But Libra and Cancer are both cardinal signs, and they're very used to change. And even I would say, even if this was like a Scorpio rising with a Libra sun, there would still be that being very used to change, things waxing and waning, things dying off and being rebirthed. There's still that. And so it's very easy for people to get caught up in like, oh yeah, I'm a Libra, there's no way that I could be like, a Cancer rising, or like, I could feel like a Cancer. And I would say you have to remember that the signs are building on themselves, just like the houses build on themselves quite a bit. And I covered that in a different lesson. But so that's a little thing about getting back to primary motion. Primary motion is constancy. Secondary motion, in primary motion is like constancy, but it's also from like a God-like perspective. Secondary motion is going to be represented by the moon, and I'm actually going to drag that down here before we talk about some of the significations. The secondary motion is going to be counterclockwise, and it's going to represent more our experience. So where primary motion is representing like the God view or the zoomed out God view and perspective of the universe. Secondary motion is counterclockwise. And so it's looking at the planets as if they're moving across the sky, which they are. And I think this is where I would love to have like an astronomical like software, but I don't have one yet, where the sun is literally going this way across the sky. It's going from east to west. Um, and we have the planets going this way. So if you looked at a telescope, it would look like the planets are going across the sky this way. And so you have them kind of merging. This also comes into play when we do have re- uh, retrogrades. There we go. Um, and so, and this explains a lot about like why retrogrades, why we experience some of the things that we do with retrogrades. It's all primary and secondary motion. But secondary motion is going to be about change. It's going to be about the things that, die off eventually, or the things that can be birthed, things that are new, things that are up for, um, I guess, not debate, but, up for change. And that's what we see in the moon representing is change. And so that's why we see it as our perspective, because our day to day changes all the time. Whereas if we had a more zoomed out perspective and we were looking at things from a primary motion perspective, we would see this as kind of just like part of the big picture. And so the small changes that are happening aren't really recognized that much. And because everything is kind of looked at like, it all feeds into itself. So yeah, so that is going to be secondary motion that's represented by the moon. So let's go back up to the sun to look at some of its correspondences or why it would represent those things. So we were saying that the sun is like more about the soul and something that's constant and eternal. But the soul is always looking for something. It's reaching for something. It has purpose. It wouldn't be the soul if the essence of a person is, or like the core of a person, I think is really represented by the sun, or the soul. And so we can look at it that way. And so the sun becomes, uh, associated with the following things: your core purpose, and what you seek out in life, your goals, and those goals and what those goals are built on, your character or your core, leadership, authority figures or kings, how you achieve your empire, effigies such as statues, portraits, even crowns. What are you known or seen for as? Like, what are you known for, or what are you seen as? What energy is pushed out and radiated by you? Um, what is constant and lives on? So we were talking about that before. God, fame, high priest, the color yellow, gold, the metal. I think you can also say like gold, the color. It could also be, but usually it's yellow. Like when we talk about plants and astrology in particular, and we mesh herbalism and astrology together, it's going to be yellow. But you could do like gold too. Barley and wheat are going to be represented by the sun. Anything really bitter in taste. So I'll use like um, the uh, the example of like a lemon rind, or like um, a orange rind is very bitter, but though both those things are ruled by the sun, so it's also bitter in taste. So anything bitter in taste is going to be um, ruled by the sun. And then intelligence. So the sun brings light to something. It's going to really um, illuminate things. And so when we see, like when the sun moves signs, we see some sort of focus or illumination of the concepts that the sign that the sun is in. And so it's intelligence, yes, because it's bringing some enlightenment, but it's also focus as well. And so then we also see the sun representing the father or the man of the house. And then for parts of the body, each planet represents a part of the body, as does each sign represents different parts of the body as well. And so for parts of the body, we have the head, the right eye, the torso, the head, or sorry, the heart, and the life breath as well. So the air that you breathe and like all of that is going to be sun rulership, under the sun's rulership, as well as the nerves. And like we were talking about, the sun only rules one sign, and it's going to be Leo. In modern astrology, this is associated with the fifth house. The sun is associated with the fifth house, and it takes the sun 30 days to travel through one sign. And so the sun and the moon never retrograde. And so we can move on to the significations of the moon. So the moon is all about change, and it's going to be the things that wax and wane, things that are kind of built up and then released. And so we have the physical body. The physical body is something that we have for a time, and then we die, and then it goes back to the ground. Conception, same thing. There is a building effect, and then there's that releasing of the baby. Cohabitation, I don't think I had to explain that. But then we also have marriage, and some of these significations do come from like mythology as well, like the goddess, the mother, nurses as well. The moon really stands for like women in particular, and so queens, the woman of the house, possessions, fortune, cities, and large gatherings of people and communities. Appearances, keep in mind that the moon doesn't have its own light. It gets its light from the sun. And so it's very reflective and very reactionary in astrology when we're talking about the moon versus the sun. The sun will do what it's going to do regardless of external stimuli, but the moon can be a bit more reactionary because it gets its light from the sun. And so it's a bit of a mirror. And so we see money spent and money gained. Oh, sorry, I was going somewhere with that, appearances. So it's the things that maybe we don't see, we may or may not see. So think about like the new moon versus the full moon. It's the difference between being able to see the whole picture of something or being able to see something for what it really is versus it actually showing up. Um, and so we see money spent and money gained, homes, boats, travel and wanderings. Think about like how a crab moves from side to side. So like wanderings don't always mean that you're lost. It just means that you're not moving in a very direct way. So I always use the example of like somebody that maybe went to like Spain or something and they were only supposed to be there for a month. But then maybe on the way back home, they backpack through Spain and they, go to a city, maybe, they go to a whole nother country that's slightly closer to home, but not home, So they're wandering, they're taking a very indirect way. They're taking a very indirect way of getting home. We could also say like wanderings could, be very representative of people that are self-employed, or the moon could be very representative of people that are self-employed because every day is different. And so it's a very indirect way of making money. However, it is making money, and so you know. But things are always, up for change from a day-to-day perspective, of either how much money you make or if you make money at all. So then you have the color light green, silver, the metal and the color, glass, and anything salty in taste. And so then for parts of the body, you have the left eye, the breast, the stomach, the spleen, the membranes, and the bone marrow. The moon, like we said, does not retrograde. It rules one sign, which is going to be Cancer, and the moon is associated with the fourth house in modern astrology. The travel time for the moon between signs is going to be 2.5 days. And so that is the sun and the moon. So we can go ahead and move on to Mercury. Mercury is of course going to be the messenger god of mythology, but in astrology he comes to be associated with some of the following things, such as education, intellect, communication. That's all of the Mercury stuff, right? Brotherhood, or like I can also just say like connections, friends, siblings, translations, explanations, messengers, announcements, counting and mathematics, voting, games, secret acts of stealth, surprise, fraud, and theft, sharing, discoveries, students and followers hearing and diversity, critical thinking, forethought, decisions, and the process of making them. That one's particularly important, especially for the new moon in Gemini that's coming up on Monday. If you want to know more about that and why I say that this one is important, have a look at my YouTube channel, Eden I Tarot. I'm coming out with a video about the new moon in Gemini. I think it's scheduled to come out at noon Eastern Standard Time today, which I think for those of you watching in Colorado is going to be 10 o'clock a.m. 10 a.m. Your time. So then we also have like accountants, architects, and astrology students, sculptors, doctors, teachers, musicians, and lawyers. Arguments and debate. So the back and forth is going to be represented by Mercury and then copper, as well as coinage as well. For parts of the body, we're going to have the hands, the shoulders, the fingers, the joints, the windpipe, the tongue, and the intestines. Mercury rules over two signs, which is going to be Gemini and Virgo. And in modern astrology, Mercury comes to be associated with the third and the sixth house. The travel time for Mercury between signs is going to be anywhere between 2 weeks and 2 months. So if it retrogrades like it is now, it's going to stay in one place, in one sign for about 2 months. However, I will say this Mercury retrograde and the next Mercury retrograde in particular are going to be a bit different because they're not spending time just in one sign. Like this one, it retrograded from, I think, like 3 degrees Gemini, and it went back to Taurus. So whenever we have a Mercury retrograde that links two signs together, you're linking the lessons together of those two signs and putting them together, and that's what you should be focusing on for that Mercury retrograde. But so we see Mercury kind of like being around the same place essentially for about 2 months before it can progress. And then if you count, I guess, on the time that it spent in Gemini when it initially got there before it retrograded and then continued on, it would be 2 months as well. But so then we see uh, it takes approximately it retrogrades approximately every quarter or every actually I should say every 3 months. My bad. No, not every quarter. Wait, every quarter. Yeah, no, every quarter. I had that wrong on. I'll have to correct that maybe later. Because I can't even correct it now because my word won't show up on here. But so yeah, so that is going to be the first three planets that we cover. So I wanted to do these three planets first because these are the sun, moon, and Mercury are the planets that I guess are the most neutral. The planets that we get into from now on are going to be either malefics or benefics, except for the outer planets, which are a bit of a mixed bag to be fair. So Mars and Saturn are malefic. So these are planets that they destroy, they say no, and they corrupt. I want to also say that we have benefics, which are Venus and Jupiter, which say yes, they affirm, they expand, they do all the things. But I will also say, like, as a disclaimer to that, malefics can do good things. Benefics can also do bad things. So I'll repeat that. Malefics don't always do bad things. They can do good things. It really depends on how they're dignified in the chart. Benefics don't always do good things. They can do bad things. Again, it really depends on how they're dignified in the chart. Because a good example of this is Jupiter. Jupiter expands on things, and if it is expanding on the right thing in your life, then maybe it gives you a wealth of people, of friends and allies and things like that. I think that's one of the more like favorable ways for Jupiter to express itself. However, Jupiter does not. It doesn't like discriminate what it's expanding on per se. And so we can see Jupiter like expand on, if we're going to go with like, you know, the people that are around you. Jupiter can expand on the people that you have around you, but maybe not all of those people are good people, and you have people that are very jealous of you, because that is also another Jupiter expression. Like maybe you yourself have a, are very Jupiterian, you're very abundant, and you're doing well for yourself all the time. And Jupiter is, yeah, bringing in all those people around you. But if you don't have the right people around you, and people are always trying to take from you, Jupiter is also expanding on that, which is no good. And I think I have another example of that, especially with Jupiter. Jupiter is just like an easy one to pick on for that. So, but we're going to start out with Mars first, which is the malefic. Mars does sound, you're going to see when we switch from malefics to malefics, the difference between them. This does not mean that people that have like a Mars ruled sign like Aries or Scorpio automatically represent these things. We have to remember there's a great deal of astrology, of mythology, and other things going on, like modes and elements that are being factored in along with the planet that rule that sign. And that's and so like when you're looking at this, like if you have like Mars and Aries, that does not mean that you are all these things. Or if you're an Aries or a Scorpio or something like that, that you are all these things. And I'll say the same thing for like Venus and Jupiter ruled signs, such as like Sagittarius, Pisces, and Taurus and Libra. And so let's get into Mars. So Mars's significations are the following things. And so, so I was saying that with the sun, moon, and Mercury, that they're a bit neutral. And so they're neutral because the benefics and the malefics affect those three planets. And so the sun and moon and Mercury are kind of up for grabs on whether or not they express themselves in a chart as a benefic or a malefic. It depends on what kind of aspects are being made from a benefic or a malefic to the sun, moon, or Mercury, especially Mercury in particular. Because Mercury is like just neutral in general. Like the god Mercury was androgynous, literally. And so we see it the same way in astrology. So it's definitely neutral. And then the actual like uh, benefics, like for, or the actual like sun and moon, when we talked about sect in Intro to Astrology, the sun and moon were like rulers of like different kinds of charts. And so they are kind of, we already kind of see them incorporated into this idea as well. So Mars has the significations of violence and acts of force. A lot of us know Mars for being, a planet of aggression or anger or rage, but it also represents some of these things as well. War, battles, and fights. Think about what we're experiencing right now. And I don't want this to like trigger anyone, but I am saying this because I'm like, literally look at what's happening right now. Going on a little tangent, on a little tangent here, because I remember before Jupiter went into Aries, and this is why I always tell people be very careful about what kind of astrologers that you subscribe to, especially like on TikTok and like I guess even on YouTube, but especially like on TikTok, like be very careful who you're listening to. Because I remember when Jupiter went into Aries, everybody was like, oh yeah, it's the best time to like, manifest. It's like new beginnings. It's all this good stuff. And which is true. It's, I wouldn't say that that was a great time to manifest, especially because we had just started the Mercury retrograde and we had just gotten off of the Scorpio eclipse. Or we were smack dab in the middle of the eclipse, and I think the Scorpio eclipse was just about to happen, and so it was not a great time to manifest anything, but it was more a good time to listen. But I remember, yeah, seeing a lot of videos talking about like, oh, it's a great time to manifest because Jupiter is going into Aries. And it was all of this like great stuff. And to that, I will say, of course, like good things can happen in any sign. However, we do have to remember that Aries is a Mars ruled sign, and so Mars does have some holding power when it comes to like what's happening on a collective level. And so look at kind of what happened when Jupiter went into Aries. We started seeing a lot of violence happening. Aries can represent youth. And so look at all the violence that kind of happened like around the time Jupiter went into Aries, like surrounding youth. I'm not saying that that is, an excuse for anything. And I don't think that's, that even remotely sounds like what I said. But, um, it's we are very susceptible. Obviously, that's the whole thing about astrology, is very susceptible to like what's happening with the planets on a collective level. And so Mars rules violence and acts of force, war, battles and fights, robbery. I don't think I have it on here, but it also rules like guns. Um, and so as does Aries in particular, adultery, marriage, especially for women. When I say marriage, I mean like, just getting together with the opposite sex, because Mars is literally the planet of penetration. And so, it's like male sexuality. So it could be like the penis or just like men in general. And so that's why we say like, Mars in a woman's chart is kind of like what she's attracted to in men, or, her masculine counterpart. And that doesn't even have to mean in like a man. It's like Mars is going to be like the go get it energy. Venus, whereas Venus is going to be like the come hither kind of energy. And so it's like literally passive versus aggressive, or passive versus active energy. So that's all I mean by that. Banishment, estrangement from one's parents. Mars is so much about like severing or cutting something off. Captivity, abortion, rape of women, sex, lies, hopeless situations, anger, lawsuits, fevers and ulcers, inflammation, Masons, leadership, military service, soldiers, hunting, poor vision, internal bleeding, blood, seminal passages, bile, pooping, iron, wine, legumes, the color red, anything pungent, and taste is also going to be a Mars thing. Parts of the body are going to be the back, so the whole back of someone from head to toe, the butt, and the genitalia. And then Mars rules two signs. It's going to rule the signs of Aries and Scorpio, and is associated in modern astrology with the first and eighth house. It takes Mars 2 months to get through one sign, anywhere between 2 months and 6 months if it retrogrades. So Mars will actually retrograde, I do believe, in October. I've been saying August for all this year, and I realize it's actually October. I think it starts its retrograde on October 30th, if I'm not mistaken, and it's in Gemini. And so keep an eye on what's happening right now, my friends, especially if you have a lot of Gemini placements with that Mercury retrograde happening in Gemini right now. Keep an eye on what's happening right now, because all that, it's going to be revisited in October. And so we can see quite a bit of stuff, like movement happening with that. Mars will really be kind of like going back on or retrograding in Gemini. So wherever that's hitting in your chart, just keep an eye on that, because you'll be revisiting that later this year. So anywhere from 2 months to 6 months if it retrogrades, and then it retrogrades every 2 years. So I didn't get to say this. So Mercury retrogrades are obviously going to be, or retrogrades in general are going to be some sort of hindrance or like slowing down of the planet's energy. And so like with Mercury retrograde, we see miscommunications, we see issues with technology, we see maybe like misunderstandings. With Mars, Mars is usually very direct and it's all about action. When Mars is retrograde, we are slowing down our actions at best. Because we need to be reviewing things rather than acting on things. We need to be strategizing. Venus, it has significations of desire, love, mothers and nurses. We saw mothers and nurses being something represented by the moon as well. Divine blessings, fortune, generosity, partners, good times and parties, elegance and refinement, sacred offices and priesthoods, those who give back to the community, riches, fashion, companionship, security, consumerism, marriage, the arts, beauty, perfume makers, cosmetologists, cleanliness, elegance, supply chain management and supply chain managers, shops, animals of the sea, charisma, favorable reputations, sex, or the union of the genitalia. Pleasure, precious stones, olive, the color, or olive, like the food, sorry, the color white, and anything oily in taste. Parts of the body are going to be the face, lips, neck, nose, the whole front of someone from head to toe, and the lungs are all Venus ruled. And so then Venus rules over two signs, Taurus and Libra, which it becomes associated with the second and the seventh house in astrology. And then the travel time for Venus is going to be 2 months to 2 to 4 months, 4 months if it retrogrades. And then it retrogrades every year and a half. So we'll have another Venus retrograde next year in the sign of Leo. So when Venus goes retrograde, we often see a lot of relationship issues, lots of breakups, maybe people, exes coming back. We can also see maybe some people having issues with like money or money coming in, or like some reevaluation of like self-esteem and body, the way that we, relate to our bodies and things like that. Some transpersonal planets. So the transpersonal planets are the ones that you're going to share with people like within, 1 to 2 years of your birth. So we'll usually see if somebody was born in the same year as you, usually they'll have the same Jupiter sign. Jupiter does kind of dip into the next sign for a couple months. So if you're born in kind of like in that sweet spot, you might have somebody that was born in the same year as you. But depending on what month they were born in, Jupiter might have dipped into a different sign and then retrograded back later after they were born. So, but usually we say, give or take, if you're born in the same year, you usually have the same Jupiter as someone else. And so Jupiter comes to rule over the following things: pregnancy, childbirth, desire and love, alliances, knowledge, friends in high places, profits, salaries, fees, income, and abundance of all of these things. So that's why I was saying that not all benefics are going to do good things, because obviously if you have an abundance of fees are usually negative. And Jupiter does not discriminate. And so we're going to see justice and authority figures, government, honors, popes and heads of holy places, temples, trust funds, inheritances, adoption, freedom, wealth, colors that range from gray to creme or off-white, tin, as well as sweet tasting things. For parts of the body, we're going to see it represent the outer thighs, the feet, the semen, the womb, and the liver. So this is why for like Sagittarius and Pisces, the erogenous zones are the outer thighs and the feet for Pisces. And the outer thighs, I do believe is Sagittarius, or it's like that thigh area in general for Sagittarius. But then, so we have Jupiter representing Sagittarius and Pisces, or ruling over Sagittarius and Pisces traditionally. And then it comes to be associated in modern astrology with the 9th and 12th house. The travel time through the signs for Jupiter is approximately about a year, and it retrogrades once a year for about 4 months. And then we have Saturn, which is our next malefic. So we've covered the two benefics, Venus and Jupiter, and now we're going to cover our last malefic, which is Saturn. Saturn rules over a lot of things, and Saturn does get a bad rap. I mean, I'm going to say that by the list that I have here, I'm not going to make him sound any better. What I can say is, as a representative of Saturn, someone that is a Cap sun, or not Cap sun, Cap rising, Saturn can be absolutely delightful because he's all about what you build over time and delayed gratification. But really, once you do get that reward, it's something that you hold on to for quite some time. It's all about long-term success rather than short-term gratification. And I think most people would agree that long-term success is much better than short-term gratification, even if it makes you a bit uncomfortable at the moment. And Saturn is not afraid of making you uncomfortable. It's going to make you work for all the things on an internal and external level. So we have some of the following things being associated by Saturn: pettiness, envy and maliciousness, because a big part of Saturn is like, seeing kind of like pressure from peers, or like seeing, where you want to, seeing what you want to achieve. And if other people have achieved some remnant of what you want to achieve, Saturn is really going to emphasize that, and poke at like where you might not be as strong, and the things that you need to work on to be able to achieve those things. And so it can come out as like, comparing yourself to other people, because Saturn is really poking at, you need to work on this, you need to work on this, like kind of thing. Anxiety, self-depreciation, loners, liars, and those that play the part for appearances, or like feigned appearances, is a big Saturn thing. Harshness and strictness, gloominess and misery, tears, accusations, orphans, or like being orphaned, sailors and those that practice waterside trades, sailing and seafaring, depression and sluggishness, inaction, long-lasting punishments, obstacles, secrets and restraints, imprisonment, soil, farmers and gardeners, tax collectors, violent actions, earned rank and status and the good name that comes with them, all the heavy stuff, lead, wood, stone. Then we also have phlegm and lymph, single people, widows, gout, cough, illness, dropsy, convulsions, depravity, death by water or strangulation, tumors, dysentery, the color dark brown, and anything astringent in taste. And so for parts of the body, we have all the things that we need to actually function, because Saturn is all about necessity. That is Saturn's key word. If you remember anything about Saturn, remember Saturn is very much a minimalist, and is very much about like, what do you absolutely need to survive? So you have the kidneys, the skeletal system, the muscles, the skin, the bladder are all ruled over by Saturn. Saturn traditionally rules over two signs, which is going to be Capricorn and Aquarius. Aquarius is, of course, co-ruled with Saturn by Uranus, because Saturn is structure. And so you can't break out of the structure, which is very much a Uranus thing. You can't break out of a structure if you don't have a structure to break out of. And so we didn't have the house rulership in modern astrology being associated with the 10th and the 11th house. Travel time through the signs is 2.5 years, and then it retrogrades once a year for approximately 4 to 5 months. So that is going to be Mars through Saturn. And so we're going to start to get into the outer planets. And the outer planets, as I promised, are a bit of a mixed bag. So after this, we'll get into some chart practice, and then we'll wrap up for today. So Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, and so we see some things, with that we see associated with Venus also being associated kind of with Neptune, but on a higher level. Think of Venus as kind of like being the actress, but Neptune is the movie that the actress is playing in, or the character that the actress is portraying. It becomes like that heightened sense of beauty, or that heightened sense of creativity, or that divine perception of the world that may or may not be seen. Neptune is like all things invisible, the things that you can't see but very much affect you on a physical level. So that's why Neptune also rules over like spirits and ghosts, and like poisons as well. And it can, be like things like secrets. Secrets affect people, even if it is a bit more indirect. But your imagination is a big thing that's also like represented by Neptune, as well as your connection with the divine. That's not something that we can, put into a tangible form, but it is something that very much affects us and is very important to our ability to create and to feel and to love and to foster relationships. It's just on a higher level that's a bit, I guess, more detached. And so then we see the significations with Neptune being associated as such: ambushes, chaos, covert alliances, deception and lies, deceptive schemes and ventures, trends and movements. So like all the TikTok trends and things like that going on the internet, that's very much a Neptune thing, as are all kinds of screens and mirrors. So mirrors, but also like your TV screen or like your telephone screen, or like not telephone screen, your cell phone screen, or like your tablet screen. All of that is Neptune. It's what is being, it's how things are being perceived. And Neptune is a lot about perception. Mobs and desire, disguises and dreamers, imagination, false hope, success or failure that comes through women in particular, horses and psychics, exile, pessimism, secrets, secret societies, social unrest, sudden death, wandering, sleep, and poetry. Remember that it's sudden death with Neptune because it's like Neptune dissolves things. And so it can be a big planet that's talking about like release. And in that case, it could be like release of life, or just something just all of a sudden just dissolving. It's no longer there. Um, Wandering, sleep, poetry, dance, harmony, rhythm, emotions and feelings, intuition, poison, viruses, stringed instruments, addiction, alcohol, drugs, anemia, energy, depletion, and burnout, nutrition, catalepsy, the sea, dolphins, and connection to the divine. For parts of the body, it's going to be the cerebral ventricles, the spinal fluid, the pineal gland. I love that it's like, connected to the pineal gland, because that's how we get like, our third eye, and, being able to see unseen things. And then we have the nerve fibers and the optic nerves as well. And so Neptune is associated, or it rules over the sign Pisces. It co-rules the sign of Pisces with Jupiter, and then comes to be associated with the 12th house. The travel time through the signs for Neptune is going to be about 14 years, and then it retrogrades once a year for about 5 to 6 months. And then we have Uranus, which is the higher octave of Mercury. And so we see some of Mercury's significations here, but amped up a bit in a higher kind of like expression. So we have like brilliance and inventions, originality, humanitarianism, science, technology, electricity, rebellion, sudden change, earthquakes, natural disasters, freedom, independence, intelligence, ideas, social justice, utopian ideals, the future, groups and communities, authenticity and satellites, radio waves, magnetic fields, computers, dragonflies, the internet, social media, astrologers, icebergs, scientists, astronomers, uh, politicians, pilots and archaeologists, anarchists. Um, Uranus is like everything that's kind of like sudden, or like things that you don't expect. And so that's why it becomes like associated with like things like natural disasters and icebergs in particular, because I can guarantee you that, of course, like, in Titanic and like the story of the Titanic, they did not see that iceberg coming. It just kind of came out of nowhere. But even if we look at, about how icebergs are kind of like used in psychology, it's very much about like the mind. And Aquarius, which is a sign that is co-ruled by Uranus, is the mind. And icebergs are often used as a metaphor for the unconscious mind versus like the actual conscious mind. So like what's going on underneath the surface versus what are you seeing? And there can be a startling difference between the two, like what is seen and what is not, or what is recognized and what is not. Um, Parts of the body ruled by Uranus are the ankles, the nervous system, the bronchial tubes, the diaphragm, the lungs, and the trachea. It takes, it's of course like it rules over Aquarius with Saturn, and then it's associated with the 11th house. And then the travel time through one sign is going to be 7 years, and it retrogrades once a year for about 5 months. I didn't say this for Neptune. So for Neptune retrograde, we'll usually see some sort of truth come out. For each person, it's going to be a bit different on how that truth comes out. Sometimes there's more confusion before there's clarity, but usually with Neptune retrogrades, we see some sort of like clearing of the fog kind of come out. And then with Uranus retrograde, it's asking us, where do we want to set ourselves free? Where do we want to break out in thinking about that instead of actually like enacting it? Um, and then for Pluto, we have Pluto being the higher octave of Mars. So the significations are as such: death, transformation, rebirth, psychiatrists, analysts, detectives, political underground sewers, and those that work in them, recycling, undercover police, pathologists, volcanoes, subways, and underground transport. Snakes, desire, sexual abuse, or just any kind of abuse in general is a Pluto thing, because Pluto is about control, power, and dominance. Obsession, control, power, dominance, surgery, and needles. So about like opening things up, seeing what's underneath and inside of them is very much a Pluto thing. And so that's why we get like surgery. Um, Parts of the body are going to be associated, are going to be the genitalia, cell reproduction, immune system, and the immune system functions. Um, Pluto co-rules Scorpio with Mars. And then we have in modern astrology it being associated with the eighth house. Pluto is also going to be representative of like trauma, fear, especially like psychological fear. And then it takes Pluto about 15 years to get through one sign. We'll actually see Pluto move into Aquarius next, I guess briefly, not, we'll see it move into Aquarius briefly, I do believe, next March. And so it retrogrades once a year for approximately 6 months. And so that is the planets. Um, so we have gone through all of the we've gone through all of the actual planets. And so we're going to do a little, uh, go through a little chart practice. So we're going to do some celebrity charts and kind of talk about some planetary placements. Now, today um, we're not going to be talking about aspects like between planets. We're just talking about planetary placements in general and what they could mean. So we're not going to have a full picture of like how these are playing out in people's charts, but we are going to talk about the planetary placements themselves, since they that's what we talked about today. So we're going to be applying this, and so ideally, I would love to have my word up so that I could show you kind of like how you could go about interpreting certain chart placements. Um, because we are going to do this with the houses. And so if you remember, if you guys have any notes on houses, I would pull those out now because I'll take pauses to kind of let you answer the question before I answer it for you in the recording. So this is Angelina Jolie's chart. So she uses Sun in Gemini. So she's about to have a birthday. I love that she has Mercury retrograde natally in her chart. And so then we can see that, she also has her Jupiter return. I wonder what's going on with her. That's a lovely birthday. Having Jupiter in your sign at the time of your birthday. And she also has Mars in Aries, and Mars is currently in Aries for her birthday as well. Nice. So let's kind of take a look at this. So we will have, let's, I don't want to let's do, for her chart, let's do Moon in Aries and kind of decipher that. So we know that we can look back at, you can look back at your notes if you need to, if you're following along with this lesson. So we know, like with planetary placements, what I would suggest that you do is pick like 3 things for each thing. Pick 3 things for each thing to kind of write down. So pick 3 significations for the moon, pick 3 significations for Aries, and then pick three significations for the house that it's in. So in Angelina's chart, based on this actual like house like system that they have on this website, this is the Placidus house system. I don't use this house system often, but it can be used. There's nothing wrong with it. I use it, I think, in conjunction with whole sign astrology. So I'm talking about like whole sign when I look at this chart. And so a lot of what I'm about to say does not line up with what's actually on the screen right now. But I can also circle back and also tell you how it still relates, and it still is accurate, even if it's in whole sign, even if it's not, even if I'm looking at this from a Placidus perspective. And so moon let's talk about the moon first. So the moon, let's say three things that the moon represents. So the moon represents mother, moon represents change, and moon represents okay, so let's say like for the moon, because I'm like, since I don't know if like change is necessarily like a signification. So we'll say change still, but we'll also say maybe like um home, and then we'll say I just had another one. Um Emotions. There we go. And so the one that I often like to look at first is like what's changing constantly in her chart. So Angelina has moon in Aries. So I'll give you guys time watching this in the recording to list three things about Aries. Um, and you guys can do that now. Okay, hopefully you have your three things about Aries. So what I picked is that Aries is going to be about like a new beginning. It's about uh, achievement or like some sort of ambition. And it can also be about action. So we have ambition, action, and new beginnings. And so, with the moon being about change, emotion, and we said change, emotion, and the mother, maybe that we start to put those three things together. So, as far as emotions, maybe emotions are constantly, or like even I think in more in particular with emotions, Aries is I think seen as being maybe a bit more assertive. And so we can say emotionally, maybe she's a bit more assertive for sure on an emotional level. I wouldn't say aggressive because I think that can get into like, the downside of an Aries, but like, we want to try and keep things very neutral when we're looking at placements, unless we know the person, unless you know the person in particular. And even then, I would say, do your best to kind of keep things like very neutral, not, putting your own bias on the chart interpretation. And so maybe like, a bit more assertive, a bit even maybe a bit more abrasive, or like very confident. Mars, like being a Mars ruled sign is always going to be very confident, and that can, breed certain things such as being a bit bossy, or like it's going to be my way or the highway kind of thing. But moon in Aries could point towards emotionally her being somebody that feels things very intensely, going to be a bit more abrasive, because remember we were talking about Mars is all um, about things that are pungent in taste. And so, because Aries is a Mars ruled sign, we can have like intense emotions. But Aries is also about things that spark off very quickly and extinguish. In being a fire sign, it's, things that extinguish very quickly as well. So she might, even if she does have like maybe aggressive outbursts, things like flare up very quickly, she doesn't stay mad very, very long, very long about things. And we can see that also because the moon is about change. And so Aries is also about change because it ignites and extinguishes very quickly. But the moon is about change, and so emotions, emotionally, she doesn't get stuck on things very long. On an emotional level, she might feel very passionately about things, but she's on to the next. She doesn't have time to really, to get, staying to stay on something for too long. Um, as far as like what's changing in her life, she's always starting something new. Aries is literally the sign that starts off the astrological new year, and so it's about new beginnings, but it's also marking the spring equinox, and it's also a cardinal sign, and so it's going to have that dynamic kind of like flow to it. So she might be somebody that's always creating something new, always getting into something new. There can be a competitive edge to it, especially since Mars is here in Aries conjunct her moon, but we're just talking about the moon right now. And so there can be like, always wanting to maybe compete against herself or other people. And it can, just be like wanting to be the best. And that can really drive that ambition that we were talking about. And we were listing, like when I was listing my three things, but whatever you got, you looking at this recording, you could find different ways that could, apply for the things that you wrote down as well. Um, so that is her moon in Aries, but we still have one more piece of the puzzle, which is the house that it's in. And so Placidus is going to say that this is in the ninth, which we could apply that, and say that the ninth house is about law. It's about long distance travel. It's about spirituality, but it's also going to be about like maybe marriage. And so maybe like one of her achievements is like marriage or like wanting to be married. But it can also, I think, like the big thing that it says to me is like, maybe wanting to be very connected spiritually to some sort of ideal that really relates back to her, or something she really resonates with. And it not just resonates with, but resonates intensely with her and her being and her identity. Something that she can really identify with is her spirituality, or how she thinks. But it can also be like, Aries is very much get up and go. The ninth house is that long distance travel, and so she may be somebody that moon lives in a far off place. Or someone that is constantly doing a lot of traveling. The moon is the mother also, and so maybe mom came from a foreign place, or she has family or a home in a foreign country. So that is going to be her moon when we tie in the moon in Aries with the ninth house. Whole sign would say that this is in the 10th, though, in the 10th house. And so we would be able to keep the 10th house is all about your career and how you're seen. It is your reputation and authority figures. So, excuse me, moon in Aries in the 10th is going to be maybe when you have the emotional nature out in the 10th in the public eye, it can be like a lot of your emotions are just kind of like out there. Like people are always seeing it. It's not something that you really keep super private. Or people, constantly maybe, know where you live, or, you don't have any privacy. The moon is a bit more of a private planet, but having it in the 10th is like, you have no privacy, which I mean, it's just celebrity. So yeah. Yeah. But having that moon in Aries can point towards, having a lot of confidence and, having this like very striking kind of like persona when it comes to, or this, being this like almost superhero when it comes to like how people view you. And I think that's very accurate. Maybe people have very intense thoughts about her, and they do, especially I think when it does come to like children and how she parents. But we see a lot of this like superwoman kind of like, very strong, very very much like a powerhouse kind of woman. since the moon is women, but Mars is going to, a Mars ruled sign such as Aries is going to add a bit of an edge, which she is also, I think, seen as very edgy. If that's even a words that the kids are still using now. But we have that being in the 10th house, and so it's how she's like kind of seen and by other people. And so that is the moon between like the ninth or the 10th house for her, and both are true. And so it doesn't really matter what house system that you use, whatever one you use. I would just say that get really good at one of those before you try and combine both. Because Placidus is going to be like psychologically maybe what's going on. And it can be applied to like both house systems can kind of dip and dabble in each other's business. But and I think whole sign is, it's a lot better for like what's actually happening in a person's life. And so if we put moon in the 10th for her, it can be like her career or like what she's engaging in career wise is always changing, or her new kind of endeavors in her career are always changing. Even if she keeps the same career, she's always going to be innovating herself or like doing something new, or like taking on a new role or things like that. She's got range. We already know that with her being a Gemini, but especially with Moon in Aries in the 10th. So we have that. And then let's look at Venus in Cancer, because I think that's a good one to look at. It's right on her ascendant, so it's in her first house. And so we have Venus. Venus is, I'm actually going to pause to give you guys some time watching this to list 3 things about Venus. Okay, and then list 3 things about Cancer. Okay, so 3 things for Venus. Venus is going to be about relationships, is going to be about our values, and it's going to be about generosity. Cancer is protective, it's emotional, or it's sorry, emotional. It is Cancer is going to be, of course, the mother. It is going to be sensitive and it's protective. And so we can see putting those 2 things together, or those 3 significations for each together. Venus in Cancer is going to be a placement for her that is very much, it values motherhood. We could also, I guess, say also it values family too, because Cancer is very family oriented. But we could also say that maybe she values, you know, like you can't be a mother without children, and so, and of course family as well, but like she's very protective and she values family, and therefore she protects family and protects her children. There can be a lot of change of values because Cancer is a cardinal sign. That's not something I listed, but I just wanted to like put out there is that like a lot of changes like around the family or changing the environment of family can really be a big thing with her. But it's someone that is very empathetic when you have Venus in Cancer, because it is like very much that very like mothering kind of like nurturing energy when you have Venus in Cancer, because you're really feeding into what is needed, you're nurturing others the way that they need to be nurtured. So it's very like attention oriented and very attentive when it comes to the love nature. It can be very soft, very cuddly. and it is also very security minded. So she's a hard worker. She is sensitive, but she's a hard worker. She, really values family and her children and her family. And I said family already. And so that's three things that we can kind of get, or a couple things that we can get from Venus in Cancer. Is in the first house, and so this is all, like, all of literally what I just said is about. Actually, I'm going to give you guys time to think about, like, what the first house represents. Okay, so we said that the first house is all about the person themselves. And so all of what we were just talking about is how she identifies. Um, and I love that and the reason I even, like, went with the Venus and Cancer is because all of this is very much coming back to that moon in Aries, because the moon is going to be the ruler of her chart since she's a Cancer rising. And so the moon is in Aries. However, the moon is the ruler of the chart. And so therefore there's a tie between Venus and Cancer and the moon in Aries. They might conflict quite a bit because those two energies square each other. However, so there can be a pull between, like, who she is and, like, wanting to, protect family and her job, and her ambitions and things like that, and that kind of, like, pulling her away from family. But I would also say that she does a great deal of what she does for her family and the security of her family. So let's look at one more chart and then we will be all done for today. So let's see who we can come up with. Oh, we have Camille Vasquez's chart. Let's use her chart if we have anything. If we have a birth time, then we won't use it. There's no birth time. Okay. Um, mm, there's no birth time. Well, we'll okay, so we'll do one more like chart example after Camille, that has a house that has a time of birth with it. But so she has Venus and Leo. Um or actually let's do this better because we've actually seen this placement. Mars and Scorpio. So Mars and Scorpio is going to be so okay, so sorry, I keep forgetting that I'm not supposed to be, like, interpreting it right off the rip. So write down three things that Mars can represent and three things that Scorpio can represent. And I will give you time to write those down. Okay. So we have Mars is going to be about severing. It's going to be about violence. It's going to be about assertiveness or aggressiveness. We've seen quite a bit of that with Camille. I mean, and sometimes planetary placements, especially if we don't know how they are showing up, like where they're showing up, sometimes it can be, interpreted also as, like, other people, like embodying parts of our own placements. However, I will say, like, in every clip that I've seen of Camille, as she's doing her job in this trial, she chooses violence every time. And so there are no niceties that, when she's on the stand. And even, like, the ways that she looks at, like, the person on the stand, it's, like, very intense. But okay, so Mars is all about severing, it's about violence, and it's about it's about assertiveness or like aggressiveness. Scorpio is about everything that's underneath, or like wanting to dive into the subterranean parts of things, or like wanting to get into the, maybe things that are a bit more hidden. It's about transformation, it's about rebirth. And it can also be, a bit more emotional, but it's also a fixed sign. And so it's going to have a lot of ambition. And so, when we have Mars in Scorpio, we're definitely looking at somebody when they see a line of attack, or when they see when they see blood, they're going for the kill. And then we can also see like Mars and Scorpio as like cutting a situation open, wanting to dissect it to be able to see what's going on underneath. So those prying questions that she does a lot, it can be like a line of attack where it's very much like maybe an ambush kind of person, or someone that, they see a line of attack, they take it. And they're not going to be somebody that's going to prance around things a lot. They're going to get straight down to like the root of the issue. They're going to ask a lot of questions, or they're going to, cut into things to be able to see things from a different perspective. Really see like, and we could say exposing things. So I literally think about like when I think about Mars and Scorpio, like pulling the hood back off of something to kind of see what's underneath. And that's definitely something she does on the regular in the courtroom. And then, all of that ambition and, really going after what it is that she is trying to achieve, that's going to be, a big thing as well. Whenever we have Mars and a Mars ruled sign, we do see a lot of like aggressive, and like you can even kind of see it like in the way that she talks. It's very like aggressive when she's doing her job. And I don't know like, how she talks like, in, everyday kind of in the everyday kind of like world, but I would imagine it's not too much different. And so especially with that moon in Gemini, it's going to be like maybe it's going to be some intense conversation, even if we look at like where Mercury is at. Mercury's in Leo, which is still going to be like very much like that full force kind of communication, very passionate communication. Like it's not like, it's not like, oh yeah, like we're doing like a whole like little dance or whatever when it comes to like asking questions or talking to people. It's going to be like we're going in like full blast on like these questions. And so that is going to be her Mars and Scorpio. So let's get our last chart on here to talk about. So let's see. We did Johnny Depp's chart last time, so let's do another one. Let's do another one that I like sort of know about. I don't want to do the Kardashians. Let's do Robert Pattinson because I think we do have a time for him. Yep, we have time for him. So he's a Taurus rising, Sun in Taurus, Venus in Gemini. Let's do Mercury because we haven't talked about Mercury. So Mercury, write down 3 things that you attribute to Mercury and 3 things you attribute to Taurus, and I will give you time to write those down. Okay, so let's break this down first. So Mercury is about communication, it's about intellect, it's about connections. So intellect, communications, connection, or like how you learn connections, and we could even say movement. Let's say movement, how you learn, and communication. And connections, maybe. But like, so we'll add connections on as like a I guess secondary or an honorable mention. Um, but I can't promise that I'll remember anything past three for things without like writing them down. So Taurus is a Venus ruled sign, and so it's going to be, and it's a fixed sign, and so it's going to be about momentum. So it's going to again going to be about moderation, ambition. It's going to be about like what makes you comfortable. It's about self esteem, and it's going to be about values. So okay, let's kind of like rule that back. So it's about values. It's about comfort, and it's going to be about, let's say, beauty as well, or like harmony. So having Mercury, this is the planet of communication, in a Venus ruled sign such as Taurus, is going to be about harmony. So he could be somebody that is very charismatic, or, because it's a Venus ruled sign, it's about beauty. So very charismatic, maybe somebody that is a bit more level headed and is able to be the key peacekeeper when it comes to like, what's happening around him with other people. It can be maybe someone that is a good listener as well. Um, but it's also going to be somebody that speaks up for themselves too, with Mercury and Taurus. For um, how he learns, it's probably going to be like more of like a one-on-one thing. Venus is very like one-on-one. So maybe someone that might have needed like, a private tutor, especially since in this chart, it's putting his Mercury in the 12th. So maybe like private education, or like, maybe somebody that needed like a one-on-one tutor, or like needed one-on-one help when like, learning things. Anything in Taurus takes time, and it's very repetitive. And so even like with maybe like how he like talks, maybe he finds himself having to repeat himself a lot, like, or needing to repeat motions or repeat lines a lot, which I mean, I imagine any actor has to do, but, when it comes to like communication, and, maybe what he's doing for movement and things like that, um, it can be like, to feel comfortable, he has to do it more than once. Um, and so it's a creature of habit for sure. Um, and then we could say, last thing, for Mercury and Taurus, they're going to speak up for themselves. They're going to speak up for other people, because it's a Venus ruled sign, or Mercury in a Venus ruled sign. And so it can be also about like, uh, I've like lost track of like my three things. I knew I should have written this down. It can be like Mercury being, a very creative, like being like a poet. Gosh, there we go. Like beautiful words in the, not just being charismatic, but being very creative with your expression. Especially in Placidus, this is in his 12th house, which is all about like what's going on in the subconscious mind, but it's also a very creative place as well. This is where we get like music. So I don't know if he sings, but he could just also be like a writer, or like a poet, or like a creative writer, someone that just has a really great, imagination, which I imagine would help him in his career, being able to fully immerse himself, his mind into the character that he is actually like playing. Um, Mercury and Taurus is also going to be really a very practical thinker too. So it's like step by step. It's not about like efficiency. It's about like, okay, I plan for this. I'm going to do this, this, and this. This is how I get from point A to point C. I got to do A, B, and C. That is Mercury and Taurus. And then when we put that in the first house, that just literally becomes part of him. Mercury would therefore be in its joy in the first house. And so it could be somebody that, people are very comfortable talking to, or he's very comfortable like just going up to people and talking to them. Um, it is, I would imagine, very beneficial again for his job, where he is, able to really charm people, and people are really able to like get to know him very quickly, because he is, he's able to talk about himself, and he is very opinionated. He's going to speak his piece on things, but not in a harsh way, but definitely in a way that, where he's very open about himself, and that can, cause some issues maybe in relationships, because it's opposing Pluto. But so that is our class today. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed teaching publicly for divination. Again, if you want to learn all the things, you can sign up for a private apprenticeship. I am still doing those, but this will be the last public class that I will be doing. But with that, I will see you guys next time. If you want to sign up for those apprenticeships, again, you can contact Alex, and she can get you on the list for that. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye.